Have you ever wondered why ancient Egyptian gold never lost its value for over 3,000 years? Why something dug out of the desert thousands of years ago could still buy you wealth, land, and power today, while the paper money in your pocket loses value the moment it's printed? It's almost impossible to believe. Because in a world where dollars inflate, crypto crashes, and economies crumble overnight, ancient Egypt somehow built a financial system that stood unshaken for millennia. So how did they do it? How did a civilization surrounded by sand, sun, and stone manage to master the one thing every modern nation still struggles with: value that lasts? To answer that, we have to travel back, not to Wall Street, but to the banks of the Nile. Picture it, Egypt around 2500 BC. The pyramids aren't myths, they're construction projects worth more than entire modern cities. Yet there are no banks, no credit cards, no stock exchanges, just gold, pure, radiant, and powerful. In ancient Egypt, gold wasn't just money, it was divine. It was called Nub, from which Nubia, the land of gold, took its name. To the Egyptians, gold was literally the flesh of the gods, especially the sun god Ra. It symbolized eternity, purity, and power. But here's the strange part. Everyone wanted gold, yet it never flooded the market. It never collapsed in value, because the Egyptians treated gold not as currency to spend, but as a sacred store of trust. And that's the first secret of their economy: control. Unlike today's Federal Reserve printing billions of dollars at will, gold in Egypt was tightly controlled by the state, specifically by the pharaoh and his temples. Only they could authorize its mining, measurement, and circulation. Every grain of gold was accounted for, weighed on scales, and recorded on papyrus scrolls. This wasn't capitalism. It was cosmic balance, Ma'at, order over chaos. But there's something even deeper. You see, the Egyptians didn't use gold coins for daily trade. They used what's called the Deben system, a weight-based economy. Gold and silver were measured by weight, not minted into coins. So if you were buying a boat or paying workers, you didn't hand over coins. You weighed gold or silver on scales to match the value agreed upon. In other words, gold wasn't money, it was measurement. And that difference changes everything. Because by treating gold as a unit of weight, not a token of trade, Egypt avoided the one trap that later destroyed Rome and nearly every empire after: debasement. No ruler could just reduce the gold content of a coin. There were no coins to cheapen. Gold was what it was: heavy, tangible, real. And that's why it never lost value. But here's the question. If everyone wanted gold, how did the Egyptians stop it from becoming too common? From losing its worth like modern currencies do when governments print too much? The answer lies deep in the deserts of Nubia. Down south of Egypt's border, the pharaohs controlled massive gold mines, some of the richest on earth. Workers extracted gold dust, nuggets, and ore from the ground, often in unbearable heat. But here's the key. All of it belonged to the state. No one else could mine or trade it freely. The temples, particularly the Temple of Amun in Karnak, acted like ancient central banks. They stored gold, lent it for major projects, and recorded every transaction. The priests were the economists of the ancient world, ensuring gold remained scarce, respected, and divine. And scarcity meant stability. Because while gold circulated in symbolic form, jewelry, offerings, or temple donations, the core supply never flooded the public. Egyptians couldn't overspend or print more value. Gold remained the sun's flesh, and you couldn't multiply the sun. That's why historians believe the Egyptian gold standard lasted longer than any economic system in human history. But this story gets even more fascinating, because while Egypt guarded its gold, it wasn't isolated. It traded with Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Nubia itself, regions that sometimes used silver as a measure of value. Yet even as the world shifted, gold's power in Egypt never faded. Why? Because gold wasn't just an economic asset, it was a religious one. When people believe something is sacred, they protect it. When money is tied to meaning, not politics, it holds value beyond price. And that's where Egypt succeeded, where modern nations fail. They didn't just build wealth, they built belief. But hold on, if Egypt's gold was so perfect, what happened? Why didn't their system continue forever? And what can it teach us about inflation, banking, and the collapse of modern currencies today? Before we get there, let's look closer at how ordinary Egyptians actually used this gold-based system in everyday life, because that's where the real genius hides. Imagine You're a farmer in Thebes. You grow grain, but you need new tools for your workers. Instead of paper money, you'd agree on an exchange rate. Say 10 sacks of grain for 1/10 of a deben of gold. You wouldn't necessarily hand over the gold. The value could be recorded, held in trust, or transferred through temple scribes. This was value without physical exchange, centuries before banks, credit, or the idea of savings accounts. Yet it worked because everyone trusted the underlying standard, gold itself. Even more impressive, Egypt's workers were often paid in grain, but that grain had a gold equivalent. Everything had its conversion rate, all pegged to gold. So while other civilizations struggled with fluctuating prices, Egypt's economic base remained astonishingly stable. Gold anchored everything, the price of bread, labor, and land, for centuries. That's economic discipline at a level modern societies can only dream of. But here's where the story turns, because thousands of years later, the rest of the world would rediscover gold, fall in love with it, and then destroy its value, the very thing Egypt avoided. Rome, Greece, even modern America, all repeated the same mistake, turning gold from sacred store into political tool. Every empire that tried to fix money by issuing more of it fell the same way. Rome debased its coins to fund wars. The US abandoned gold in 1971 to expand its economy through debt. Each time, value slipped through human hands. But Egypt, for 3,000 years, it resisted that temptation. Because gold was never about profit, it was about permanence. And yet, a question still lingers. If Egypt was so stable, why did it eventually fade? Why didn't its eternal gold protect it from time itself? Could even the purest money survive corruption, conquest, and greed? That's where our story deepens. Because what happened next not only changed Egypt's destiny, but shaped how the entire world views money today.
So, if ancient Egypt built the most stable financial system in history, why did it all come crashing down? Why didn't their golden age last forever? Because while gold doesn't lose its value, people do. You see, the strength of Egypt's economy wasn't just in its gold, it was in its discipline, its belief, its order. And when that belief began to fade, so did everything else. Around 1200 BC, Egypt was still rich, overflowing with treasures and trade, but power was shifting. New rulers emerged who saw gold not as sacred, but as spendable. Temples that once safeguarded value became targets for political ambition. Gold that was once used to honor gods was now melted to fund wars. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern we see today, when leaders spend more than they earn, print what they don't have, and borrow from a future that may never come. Egypt's first cracks weren't economic, they were moral. And when belief in the system dies, the system follows.
But here's what's incredible. Even during decline, Egypt's gold itself never lost value. When the Persians invaded, when Alexander the Great marched in, when the Romans annexed Egypt, they didn't destroy its gold, they took it. Because gold was still gold. Its value outlived every conqueror. It was the only currency that survived the fall of empires. And that's the timeless financial truth. When paper burns, gold remains. Let's put this in perspective. If you had one gold deben from 2500 BC, roughly 90 grams of gold, that same gold at today's prices would be worth nearly $7,000. $7,000, and it still buys you a small fortune. But a US dollar printed just 50 years ago, it's lost over 85% of its purchasing power. Think about that. A piece of metal mined 5,000 years ago holds more financial integrity than the most powerful currency on Earth today. So what changed? Why did humanity trade eternity for convenience? The answer begins not with Egypt's fall, but with its imitators. When Greece and Rome rose to power, they copied Egypt's golden model, but added one deadly ingredient: coins. Coins made trade faster, they made the economy move, but they also made it easier to cheat. A king could mint new coins, reduce the gold content slightly, and use the extra metal to make more. Instant profit. Invisible inflation. Rome did it. And by the time Emperor Nero took the throne, the silver denarius, once 100% pure, had been reduced to less than 10%. The empire grew richer on paper and poorer in reality. Egypt had understood the truth thousands of years earlier. You can't fake weight, but you can fake value. And every empire since Rome has done exactly that. Fast forward to modern times. The gold standard was the closest humanity came to Egypt's model, money backed by a physical, finite asset. For a while it worked. The US dollar was literally as good as gold. 1 ounce of gold equaled $35. Fixed, trusted, stable. But just like the pharaohs who got greedy, politicians couldn't resist. Wars needed funding, economies needed stimulation, promises needed money. And in 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard, forever. From that moment, the dollar became fiat currency, backed not by gold, but by government decree. By belief, not by weight. And belief is fragile. Today, the Federal Reserve can print billions overnight. Every dollar created reduces the value of the ones before it. That's inflation, the silent tax of the modern world. And it's exactly what Egypt avoided for 3,000 years. Because Egypt's wealth wasn't based on more money, it was based on real value. They mined gold, but they didn't create it out of nothing. They measured gold, but never multiplied it by decree. And that's why their money outlasted kingdoms, dynasties, and entire civilizations. But here's where it gets fascinating and uncomfortable. Even though our technology is advanced, our financial psychology hasn't evolved much at all. We still chase abundance instead of balance. We still trust debt over discipline. We still believe in numbers printed by machines instead of metals forged by nature. And here's the paradox. Gold still stands, quietly unchanging, waiting. When the stock market crashes, when currencies weaken, when nations default, gold rises. Just like it did when the Nile flooded, when pharaohs fell, when empires collapsed. Every financial storm ends the same way, with people running back to the one thing that never changes, trust in something real. So ask yourself, if gold has held value for 5,000 years and paper money loses value every decade, which one is the real illusion? Maybe the Egyptians knew something we've forgotten. They didn't separate money from morality. Their economy wasn't built on growth, but on gratitude. They believed that wealth was divine order, not human invention. And because of that, they created a system that outlasted even their gods. But here's a thought that should haunt every modern investor. What if value was never supposed to change? What if our obsession with growth is the very thing destroying stability? Egypt didn't inflate, it endured. And maybe that's the secret we've been missing since the dawn of finance. Because every modern currency, from the British pound to the US dollar, has lost over 90% of its purchasing power in the last century. Gold, it's still here, still shining, still holding value like it did when pharaohs ruled the earth. So maybe the real question isn't why ancient Egyptian gold never lost its value. Maybe the question is, why do we keep losing ours? Because gold never betrayed us. We betrayed it. And if history has taught us anything, from the fall of Rome to the inflation of Weimar Germany to the silent erosion of the modern dollar, it's that when nations forget the weight of real value, collapse isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. The Egyptians built an economy on balance, trust, and time. We've built one on credit, speed, and belief. One stood for 3,000 years. The other, we're still counting. So the next time you see a dollar bill, thin, fragile, printed by the trillions, remember the people who understood money before money even had a name. Remember the gold that built temples, fed workers, and outlived kings. Remember Egypt, the civilization that mastered value long before the word finance existed. And remember this, empires rise on promises, but only gold stands the test of time.